Let's talk about this new Urban Decay Space Cowboy Glitter Quad. This randomly popped up on Sephora and I knew I had to get it because I did get the previous two holiday palettes from last year that were the Moondust quads. They had different packaging and I have to say I definitely much prefer this packaging. It's closer to the packaging of their single Moondust shadows, so very much prefer this. It feels like really sturdy, nice acrylic versus the ones from last year. They're just a little bit more flimsy kind of plastic, and I will be doing swatch comparisons to their singles as well as these palettes, as well as I'm going to be live swatching these and I'm going to be doing eye swatches of each of the shades so you can get an idea what these look like on the lid. Now this is $39 just like their last year's launch. They are closer into the smaller pan size of the holiday launch and not the full size single eyeshadows. Based on just looking at the pans, it looks like there are 3 different finishes. So there's 2 very ultra sparkly shades, 1 very topper-like and 3 that have a little bit more of a base. And then the shade down here, this one is a little bit more of a satin type of shade. So it is definitely not as sparkly as the other 2 shades right here. And this first shade is actually called Space Cowboy Rides Again. So definitely want to show you how this compares to the original as well as the one in the palette, because I did think that those 2 were different from each other. So we got to see how different this one is from both of them. These have been really in their revival era recently and I'm totally here for it. There's quite a bit of sparkle to go around in these shades and the sparkle sits on top, so I definitely recommend a tacky primer if you want to get an all-day wear out of this. But even then, personally, I do experience fallout. So let's get right into the live swatches of the shades, the comparisons, and then the eye swatches, and then I'll give you some of my initial thoughts at the end of the video. Here is Space Cowboy Rides Again, A-List Energy, Lunar Lit, and Sparkle Hour. So you can see the different finishes and the different tones as well. So the first shade, Space Cowboy Rides Again, is definitely the most sheer and topper-like with silver flakes, but the shade does have silver flecks as well. These are both quite pinky toned. If anything, this one is maybe more peachy than this one, but I do see peach in here as well because it does have a little bit of a shift. And then this one is like a warm tone brown base with a lot less sparkle. Getting into comparisons, here is Space Cowboy Rides Again, Space Cowboy from the palette that launched for holiday last year called Space Rider, the original Space Cowboy in a single compact, and then here's Wild Dipper, which I thought looked similar. It has just a little bit more base, so you can really see just how topper-like the new Space Cowboy is. Really just very silvery and sheer. And here's Space Cowboy Rides Again. And I'm going to compare it to some more sheer whitish shadows. So here is the Cosmic Single. Definitely more whitish and not as sparkly. Cosmic Cowgirl from the Galactic Cowgirl palette from last holiday, also more white. And Star Cowgirl from Space Rider from the palette from last year. And that one's not as sparkly. That one's a little bit more opaque white. Lunar Lit from the bottom row from the new palette. And I'm also going to swatch the shade in the top row called A-List Energy. Wild Dipper Rides Again from the Space Rider Moondust palette from the holiday. Cowgirl Warrior from that Warrior palette from last holiday. Rebel Star Single. And Cosmic Craze Single. And Wild Dipper Single, just to have all of them in here that might be similar. I think there's for sure some similarities between all these shades. I think if you were to have these on the lids, you could probably barely tell a difference, especially depending on your skin tone. I think the main thing to note is in the shade from the palette, very silvery sparkles versus these are just not as evenly dispersed, so they don't look as kind of heavily silver straight on with the similar base. I do really like whatever formulation is in this quad palette. I think I much prefer it to some of the singles as well as the palettes from last year personally. And then the last shade is Sparkle Hour. This is the satin shade with some sparkle. Here is Cosmic Space Dust. This is from the palette that launched last year. Very much more cool toned. And then a Space Cowboy Single. I just wanted to see, the base kind of reminded me a little bit in this one, but more opaque. So I just wanted to see what that would look like on. Definitely more yellow Okay, first up is Space Cowboy Rides Again. It's definitely different from just the way it looks in the pan. I haven't swatch compared them yet, and I don't have anything on my lids since I'm going to be just wiping this on and putting on the other two shades. Ooh, super, super sparkly. I don't really see a base, and I do see a lot of more silvery kind of flecks throughout it, and it feels a little bit softer versus the original that I have. Is very, very hard pressed and it feels very dry. This feels, and it is so, so sparkly. And then A-List Energy. So this one has a little bit of a duochrome and it is smoother. It is not as sparkly and it is more opaque. But I think you could build it up, but it does have obviously more opacity than this shade. It is less sparkly than the other shade. For sure. It's really, really pretty. I'm gonna go in with just a little bit more. Really, really dimensional and really shiny, but the sparkles are not as obvious. They're there for sure, like it's very shiny and still wet looking, but compared to this, it's just a little bit toned down. But so far, I really love both of them. And here it is with a flash. It's so, so sparkly. Here's Sparkle Hour. This one's also rather peachy pinky like the previous shade, and this one definitely is more sparkly, even just the way that they look in the pans. You can see these two look more shiny than these two. The labeling on the back is a little confusing because I think this one is supposed to be Space Cowboy Rides Again, but it's labeled here, but I don't think that that's correct, so that's why I'm saying it is this shade I'm picking up. And it's also definitely more opaque, kind of like the previous shade. Super sparkly and wet looking, has silver flecks in it. Very similar effect to Space Cowboy Rides Again, however it has that peachy pink base to it. Very smooth. And then the last shade is a Lunar Lit, and this one is much more of a satin compared to these other shades. It has just a little bit of a sheen and definitely more opacity. But yeah, this is more of a satin, which I kind of wish it wasn't, honestly. I think if you're going to do a sparkly little quad, I would much rather have only the sparkly topper formulas, but you could totally layer some of these other more sparkly shades on top of this one. And so that's what it looks like. Just very much like a more of a glow. There's still definitely some sparkle, but compared to this one again, it's not as sparkly. And here it is with flash. So upon first impressions, now of course I do have already some of their other Moondust shadows, so I'm a little bit familiar with this kind of formula, and I have to say, definitely recommend a tacky primer, especially if you have hooded lids where your top lid folds over and kind of rubs on the lid part that's closer to your lashes, because you will most likely get fallout. I get actually a lot of fallout, and especially with the holiday shades, because there was something extra dry about these, and the sparkles really just kind of sat on top, and so they were really like, if you took a brush, you could just blend them away. So if you don't like fallout, I would honestly not recommend these at all if you don't like fallout at all, because you will most likely experience fallout. However, depending on your eye shape, if you have deep set eye, you might not experience the issue of having fallout just in general with most eyeshadows. So something to keep in mind before you go ahead and buy this palette, or really any of the other Moondust shadows. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, there's 3 different, I would say, finishes in here. I really wish that all 4 shades had this super ultra sparkly formula in them. I just feel like for $39, it could have been even better. That being said, I think this is a really good price for what you're getting. I just wish this more satin shade wasn't in here, but of course you can layer these shades on top of that one, especially the new Space Cowboy, since it is so sheer and very just a silvery sparkle look. I think this is a very smart release, and I really love this new packaging upgrade. Really hoping that they actually come out with a bit more, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if we will see at least one more by the end of this year. Overall, I would say that you do not need all of these shades. I think a lot of these will look very similar on the lid, specifically all the pinky shades that I compared. I mean, on the lid, they're gonna look pretty much more or less the same. Also will be dependent on your skin tone and your undertone. If you don't have any of these, because these are $24 a pop, I think this is a great deal just to have these to try out. And also if you don't have a lot of Tarpa like shadows, I think this is a great option to have in your collection. Just you can really pair this with any of your shimmer shades or any of your matte shades from other palettes. But these are really, really fun and super ultra sparkly, especially in the sunlight. So they are very fun, very great one and done type of eyeshadows. So let me know in the comments below if you plan on picking this up, or if you have any of the Moondust shadows, which one is your favorite. I would love to hear your thoughts. That's everything for this video. If you enjoyed it or you found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.